I'm Anita Sarkeesian. I am the executive director of Feminist Frequency. One of the projects we run is the Games and Online Harassment Hotline, and that's what this talk is about. So the Games and Online Harassment Hotline is a emotional support resource for people who make and play games. It's text message based here in the US. And yeah, this is Jay. Jay's gonna do most of the talking today, which is for everybody's benefit. But I just want to tell you a little bit about how the project started. So in 2019, you might remember this, there was a large number of people who came forward about abuses in the games industry. It was happened in like late August, early September. PAX was happening. It was a very intense moment, and lots of people came forward about toxicity, abuse in gaming. And it was a very intense moment for a lot of us because, I mean, why? Of course it was an intense moment for all of it. Dude, it's Friday. We're good. I'm doing great, right? Yes, thank you. I need this. Yeah, okay. So what ended up happening in that moment was everybody was sort of flailing about trying to figure out how to support survivors, what to do about like the harms that are coming forward. How do we talk about this? What does this look like? And we're all kind of living in this trauma that is bubbling up. And I was thinking about how I have a lot of experience with abuse in the industry and how I understand this industry really well. So I just started talking to people. So like for about a month, I reached out to everyone I could. I got introductions and was just asked questions like, what things would you like to see happen in this industry? What things have you seen tried that aren't working? What things are happening now that are working? And I took all of that information and decided to do several different projects under Feminist Frequency as a way to help reduce toxicity in the games industry. And the Games Hotline was the first one that we started because what we realized in that moment was people are suffering right now and they have nowhere to go. So when all of that went down, we opened up our DMs on Twitter and was like, hey, if anyone needs anywhere to go, like you can message us, which why would you ever do that? Like it's insecure. You don't know who's on the other end of it. And I was shocked at how many people reached out. And like were very vulnerable and revealed really personal experiences. And that led me to realize that like people just need somewhere to go. Why don't we formalize this? Why don't we make it bigger than just me at the end of a Twitter account or like a friend of a friend of a friend? So the goal with the hotline has been to create an emotional support resource that is games competent. That was always the goal, is that internet life, online harassment, games culture is specific. And while the abuses and the harms and the toxicity that happen in our spaces are not unique to our industry, the language around it, some of the ways that it manifests, the community, all of the things that make us gaming are really valuable to helping to serve us in the ways that we need it the most. So yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, that's the story. That's how it started. Now we run this thing. I'm going to pass it off to Jay, who is the Hotline Director and Programs Manager at Feminist Frequency. And that's happening now. All right.
Thanks, Anita.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. I'm Jay. I'm the Hotline Director at the Games and Online Harassment Hotline. I use they, them pronouns, and I was brought on in 2020 to help with the launch of this Games Hotline. And like Anita said, right away, what set us apart from other hotlines was that our responders were all trained not only in mental health, emotional support, but also the culture issues and particulars of being in games. And also being a resource that was created directly by directly impacted folks who have had long histories and backgrounds in games and deep wisdom and knowledge of harassment and abuse made it really, yes?
Nothing.
Oh.
Sorry, are both of these mics on? This is off. Okay, sorry.
Okay, thank you.
I'm hearing an echo.
Yeah, created by directly impacted folks and drawing from like a deep wisdom of those experiences because this has been happening for such a long time. And so we took 2020 to set everything up and launched in August. And since then, we've been supporting folks all across games on a wide swath of issues, from everything in-game harassment to industry workplace environments, general online harassment and threats, community conflicts and fallouts, and mental health struggles. We just published an impact report about that first year of conversations that we had. It has a bunch of anonymized data about who called in, what folks are texting about, what types of trends we're seeing. Some highlights are here. A pretty even half and half of our texters were players and folks who work in the industry. The most common topics we saw were online harassment and mental health. And among texters who experience identity-based harassment, the most common form was gender-based harassment, followed by sexuality and race. So if you want to look at any more of that data, you can find that on our website on gameshotline.org. I'm not going to go through much more of it here. I want to just kind of pull out and look a little closer on some things relevant to the games industry. So I guess where I want to start is that really overwhelmingly, burnout and hostile workplaces were the most common things we talk about on the hotline with folks in the games industry. And when I say those two things, I don't mean them distinctly, like there are these people who are burnt out and these people who are facing hostile workplaces. They are very much compounded in this just way that paints such a picture. And so I think it really is important to address these issues in conjunction because they can't be pulled apart in people's experiences. We know, of course, that so many people come into games because they love it. We hear all the time that making games, working in games has been their dream. It's been something they've always wanted. But because of the unsustainable workplace conditions, now they feel like they can't stay. Now they feel like they're being run into the ground. And so we see, of course, the stress and deadlines and overworking compounded with abusive dynamics from bosses, compounded with the normalcy of offensive and oppressive statements, compounded with the microaggressions or the day-to-day actions that reinforce the gatekeeping and marginalization of underrepresented developers, compounded with sexual violence at work, outside of work with coworkers, or at professional events. And then compounded with HR departments that diminish or dehumanize folks, even yelling and further traumatizing folks. And so these, of course, so the information and stories I'm telling y'all today are general trends and not about any one individual. Our hotline is obviously confidential, but these, overwhelmingly, the conversations that we have really paint a picture together, and that's what I'm sharing with you today. And so all of those things compounded together, it creates such an interesting experience because for game developers, their work is so rooted in passion. They also feel guilty for the suffering that they're dealing with. Right? There are so many messages that tell workers that they should be grateful to work here, that they're replaceable and disposable because there's hundreds of people who would want their job. And it creates this spiral where folks feel, this is my dream job, but I'm suffering, but I should be grateful, but I don't know if I can keep going. And it really just kind of wears away at folks' mental health. And so that's a lot of what we support people around and talk to people with on the Games hotline. The other thing I wanted to point out here, you noticed in that last slide with the pie chart, we have been hearing from more and more students who are studying game development or games industry related degrees. And it has been really interesting to see how closely the things that they bring to the hotline and what they're struggling really mirrors the stories we hear from game developers working in the industry. We hear the same burnout, the same stress, the same, this used to be my job, but I don't know if I can do this anymore. And also the same hostile environments, sexual violence, maybe not from bosses, but instead from professors. or other mentors in the space. And so, yeah, I thought that's been really eye-opening to see too, that this is starting even before some folks make it into the industry. I think this, yeah. So like Anita said, right, this hotline obviously came from a very survivor-centered space, largely inspired by a lot of the Me Too stuff. And so we started from that kind of survivor-centered space. And then, of course, knew so much about the hostile workplaces and crunch and those problems in the industry, knowing that there would need mental health support there. And then, of course, we know in gaming communities, too, there's a lot of in-game harassment and harassment in gaming communities. And so we prepared for all of that. The one thing we didn't necessarily anticipate, and the surprise I kind of wanted to share with y'all that we learned in our first year, was that we didn't expect folks who have caused harassment or harm in the industry to text us for support. But it actually, really the first week that we opened started happening, just kind of on its own. And that was a moment for us. We had to really look at, what is the space that we're creating? What are we doing this work for? A lot of other hotline models, a lot of rape crisis hotlines, for example, will not offer services to folks who have been accused of or have protective orders against them for sexual violence. And so, yeah, we really had to ask ourselves, what do we want to do? Do we want to hang up on these people? Do we want to talk to them, even though they're kind of causing the harassment and we're an anti-harassment resource? And ultimately, we decided that we did want to talk to them, and we did want to find a way to hold accountable conversations with them. We made that decision because we really understand that this issue of harassment and abuse is cultural and systemic, not necessarily because of individual bad apples. And ultimately, for people to change, they have to feel supported. It's really hard to want to make hard changes in yourself when you feel like there's no hope and no one would care. But at the same time, it's not always appropriate for the victim, survivor, or directly impacted community to offer support. And we also know that our current institutions are often more complicit than accountable and offer very little support for people who have caused harm as well. And so as the hotline, we occupy this unique third-party space that can say, hey, we're here for you. It sounds like you hurt some people and did some things that were not okay, but it also sounds like you want to do things differently, and that matters too. Let's talk about what you need to make that change. So we started talking to people. We started talking about that we were open to talking to people, and more people came and talked to us. And I wanted to kind of dive a little deeper and share some of the things that we found. The first thing I want to touch on is that folks are coming to us from a wide spectrum of self-awareness. On one end, from all the accusations are lies, all these women are crazy, to something in the middle like, okay, maybe I shouldn't have said these things, but it's not like I'm a sexual predator. To the other end of, I really see these patterns and how I keep harming people, and I want to change, but I don't know how, or even if it's possible. And so that was also another thing we had to learn of, how to really meet people where they were, because all those conversations look really different, but are all really important steps on the journey. The other thing we really saw that just became so apparent as we were having these conversations were that isolation and exile were the biggest struggles for these folks who are wanting to change and learn from the harm that they caused. Of course, this is an understandable and sometimes warranted consequence of causing harm, but what we're seeing is that what happens is that these folks end up feeling really alone, really unsupported, and often confused. A lot of them often express a lot of confusion and lack of clarity around even what they did that was harmful and why, or even necessarily who exactly was impacted. And so that becomes also a barrier in their own kind of learning and growing. And so, of course, I'm not here to say that no one should that folks should never be removed from communities or positions, especially if they're continuing to actively cause harm, maybe abusing a position of power to continue that harm. But the thing that we are seeing on the hotline is that simply removing someone doesn't solve the larger problem, and it doesn't necessarily automatically help someone change or grow. So we're still kind of exploring, what an alternative solution and an alternative path forward can look like there. These have been really challenging conversations, and we're still learning and wanting to improve the way that we do this. We're just really experimenting and trying things out and continuing to build on the ways that we have these empathetic and validating, but not endorsing or saying that what they did was okay or minimizing the harm that they caused. We wrote a piece on our website with more details about how we have those accountable conversations if you're interested in reading more about that. Awesome. So really quickly, going into year 2, we are still a baby fledgling hotline, but we're really excited that actually now that we're halfway through our 2nd year, we're actually on track to double our conversation volume, which means more folks are hearing about us and reaching out. We're also working on trying to share more of our knowledge and make more of it public. We have so many conversations on as the team behind the hotline of wow, we saw a whole bunch of blackmail related chats come in. So why don't we reach out to lawyers and security experts and therapists and see how we can help really refine the way that we respond to this. And so we have a bunch of cool conversations like that, and I'm wondering how we can take an extra step to share that with folks who don't text the hotline, because currently the only way you would get that is if you text it into us, but we know that there are a lot of people who can't or won't. And then, of course, our goal always will be just staying responsive to the community. We don't want to prioritize growth or expansion in a way that doesn't reflect what is coming up for folks and what folks are bringing to us and wanting and needing for us. So I linked a few other resources here around having supportive conversations with other folks, and also just around reducing toxicity in the workplace. I didn't want to repeat all of that here, and instead wanted to see if there were folks who wanted to ask questions and see if we could respond to some stuff. So I'm curious in this room what specific questions you have around how to support each other, how workplaces can support employees, and what it takes to break cycles of harassment, or anything else specific about the hotline or things that are on your mind. Sure, go ahead.
Hi there, thank you so much, both for this presentation and the service itself. I was wondering if you could speak on, I am a community manager for several online spaces, and often I see that there is an immense amount of pressure put on the people in charge of said spaces when someone is being harmful to completely remove the person. Mm-hmm. Would you have any advice for how to negotiate kind of conversations around that within the greater community, and building that kind of trust that, no, we do hear you and care about what you're talking about, we're just not completely cutting off X person, or we are.
Yeah, I mean, there's never going to be a one size fits all, right? It'll really depend on how your community feels and what the structure of it looks like. I think really the problem we run into is that a lot of the policies and stuff that we write for our spaces tend to be very punishment oriented, because we want to believe that punishment will solve or deter a problem, when we've seen that it doesn't necessarily do that. And also that it is very kind of binary, of you're either a good person and a good member of this community, or you're a bad person and a bad member of this community. When in reality, there are many ways to hurt each other and make mistakes and run into misunderstandings or conflict. It's pretty natural as a part of just being in a community, right? Which I'm sure you know.
Yes.
And so I think, maybe reimagining with your community or with your mod team what it looks like to really start these conversations a little earlier. Not wait until they break the big rule, but see if there are ways you can catch smaller signs or flags, and what the protocols for like having that, reaching out, having that conversation looks like. And so then there's so much more wiggle room for both you and your mod team, the person maybe causing conflict in a space or harm, before it reaches an escalation point where it is like, hey, we have to remove you from this space.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you for the talk. So I have two questions. You were talking about that the expansion is not really your focus, but I was wondering if you have thought about expanding to other countries or maybe opening up to a chat or something like that. That's the first question. And the second question is maybe a bit more complex and maybe not super relevant, but I was, as an employee that's working at a company that's very small but continuously growing, I was wondering if you have any suggestions or plans on how to proactively work against having employees have to reach out to this sort of hotline, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'll let you talk about that. So for the first question, we're currently US only, and we are open, or we're online from 3 to 7 p.m. Pacific time every day. We would love to be a 24/7 hotline in many different countries, but of course we're little. And so we're definitely keeping track of information of when folks are wanting to text us to know which direction to expand. We would love to be open for more hours. We've also thought about expanding to other countries for sure, but we would definitely want to do that in a very cognizant way, understanding
I can imagine
that,
the cultures are
the culture, right? So we would want to make sure that was taken into consideration and not just do that thoughtlessly. We are also looking into integrating web chat and stuff like that.
Cool.
So on the horizon.
I'll also say, yes, this is on. I'll also say that the reason we have to pick and choose how we expand and what that looks like is financial. So if game studios wanted to help us and support us by giving us money to expand, we could do that kind of work, right? Or if we wanted to go into different regions, getting cultural partners and people who are on board to help us do that work. Because when we first started, I was like, I'm going to start a hotline. I had no fucking idea how expensive hotlines were. So, let's be honest, we're doing it. It's great, but that's part of it, right? The other thing I wanted to say is that we work with Take This, who some of them are down here, to run the Culture Shift Project, which I feel like is very in tandem with what we're doing here, which is about going into studios and addressing harm from a systemic level and doing education around that. So that is a huge piece of what we're doing as well as a part of Feminist Frequency. So I'm happy to talk to you more about that, or anyone after.
Cool. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you so much for everything that you do. I was curious to hear more about support available, honestly, for the people who are running the hotline. I could imagine that there's a lot of emotional labor and training involved in being able to respond to these things, particularly when you opened up the floor to people who have caused harm. I can imagine that would be a very difficult conversation to have, over and over again. So I'd love to hear about how y'all have supported the people running the hotline. And I would love to look at that also through the lens of how people at game studios who might be in a similar situation, often I feel, especially at smaller companies, there's a lot of pressure on maybe one individual to be like the interpersonal person. And that can put a lot of pressure on them and requires a lot of emotional labor. So I'd just love to hear any recommendations for supporting those individuals so that they can better help the people that they are serving.
Yeah, the first part's a little easier to answer. The second part, definitely, I'm holding that in my heart. The only thing that makes this possible is that we're not doing it alone. You can't run a hotline with just one person sitting there answering everything by themselves. We have a phenomenal team of agents and supervisors. And so we have supervisors on at every shift. and we have clinicians available every shift as well. And so agents are, not only not responding alone, but have that support both for, if they have a question on like how they might want to direct a conversation or respond to a conversation or different resources to pull, but also for themselves. Because a lot of these conversations can be reactive. It can bring up a lot of feelings to talk to someone who has caused harm, or even talk to a survivor who has experienced something really potentially triggering to you or really just awful to hear about. And so, our supervisors and just the peer group is there. We have like group debriefs and support sessions and games chats and all of that. It really is it's a community effort. It's never an individual effort. And I think that partially speaks to your second question as well. It isn't possible for a single individual to hold all of that for someone. When we talk a lot about like self-care and that emotional labor piece, and that conversation absolutely needs to shift towards community care and knowing that it is never about it is always going to be about interdependence.
Awesome.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it absolutely does. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here and sharing this information with us. It's I very much value it, just because it reminds me a lot of about conversations about like restorative justice, and that's something very important to me. My name is Carlos. I'm the program manager for Gameheads, and part of my job is to really look out for a lot of the youth that are in the program, just make sure that they're okay. And something that I've been thinking about a lot lately is just because I'm very new to the games industry, but not so new in education. And something I've been thinking about is like, how could we as an industry start implementing more systems of restorative justice? And in the context of like young people, in allowing young folks to actually make mistakes in their growth, but also hold them accountable as well.
I love talking about this. All these people know this is all I want to talk about all day. I want to be cognizant of the time, unfortunately, because otherwise I could stay here. How is the smallest way I could answer this?
It's a big question.
It is. I mean, I think again, yes, big question, big solutions out there. But I think I want to start with just what we do here on the hotline. I think a great place to start is always going to be making space for vulnerability and for people's humanity and dignity. I think just as a baseline, that makes a huge difference. And so, having conversations that are not shame-based, that are not punishment-based, and offering that room an invitation to accountability to say, hey, we care about you, you're important to us, and also this has happened, and we needed to do something to make it right.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for being here. Yeah.